This is the Skoda Women's Tour on RGT Stage 1. And that may be confusing that it's the Women's Tour, and this is clearly not a women-only race. So the Women's Tour of Britain is one of the biggest races on the women's pro cycling calendar, and one of the only ones that's like women-only in the Pro Tour. And it was canceled and brought onto RGT, which is awesome, but RGT was nice enough to include each stage as a race for the community also. So the pros, it's 3 stages, and the pros would do a stage, and then the community would have 3 chances to race it the next day. So this is stage 1, which is a flat road race. Watch on the left here when we start. This was bonkers out the gate, if I remember correctly. That guy is flying. Just crazy effort from him. I kicked up to 400 something and thought that would probably be too much for this start, but we did start on an uphill, which is interesting. Like, we started on that 5.5%. And I think why that happened, so this is a magic road, is what they call it on RGT. I'm just checking behind to make sure someone else is chasing, and I'm not going to get stuck out here in no man's land and then get overhauled by the blob, as they call it on Zwift. And we got 2 guys chasing, so I'm just making sure they're going to make the catch, and then we can get together and chase down this C. Jones guy that went from the gun. So I think one of the really interesting things about taking an actual pro race like this and dropping it onto this platform is this is a magic road, which means that it's a route created from a GPX file, and you can probably tell that the scenery is just kind of randomly generated, but the road gradient and the turns are based off of the actual route. And these were shortened a little bit for the E-race, but these are actual roads in England that the Women's Tour of Britain rides on. So that's an interesting wrinkle, as opposed to like the virtual Joe Martin stage race is taking place on Zwift today, actually. And like for their individual time trial, they used the Bologna time trial course. But on RGT, they can simulate the actual roads that it's ridden on, rather than either having to like build a bespoke route in Zwift that'll live there forever, and that's like a huge developing ask, or just take a route that exists in the platform already and dial that in for the race, or get as close as possible as you can to the real thing. So that's part of why I was sort of keen to give this one a try. It's just like it's interesting conceptually to maybe simulate some of the roads that this race would actually be ridden on. It looks like one other guy, this guy in the 8-bar kit, and don't get confused if you've watched my other videos. I am in this like purplish fluoro. I figured that kit would be a little bit easier to pick out. But yeah, we got a good little chase group going here, and we're going to chase that guy down. It looks like he's settled in around 3.6 to 4 watts a kilo, and with a group of 4 that's kind of churning to the front pretty well, it is pretty good bet that we're going to chase him down. One thing I've noticed on RGT is that a group that is pedaling together well can take a lot of time on a downhill. I guess that's true on Zwift as well. It's also, the difference is that it's easier to get dropped, I think, on one of those hills on RGT. Like right here, I almost came off. I am trying to be a lot more cognizant of the graph on the top right that is showing your drafting and showing how many watts you're saving. And but yeah, like right there, that was a great move from those guys to just use the speed they had and come through, because now that's really put me on the back foot. I'll add some context to this. So I've thought a lot during quarantine about doing like a virtual Speed Week, which Speed Week is an American race series that it's crits on the East Coast of the United States, and it's normally 5 to 7 days with a ton of racing all packed in. And one of my friends had done something like that on Zwift, basically done a race every day for several days. So I actually sort of backed into this one. I had already done a decent amount of racing when the women's tour was announced, and then was just excited for this conceptually. And it also looked like something that other people on RGT were excited for. So just having like consistent races where I could jump into something with a good number of people. I think we had 20 something, 30 something on the start line for this one, which is pretty solid. And so it gave me something to jump into, but I basically just backed into my my Speed Week concept. So this was, I think, my like third or fourth race in 3 or 4 days. And the way the time worked out, so I'm working from home during the coronavirus, and had to work on this day, had some things that had to get done. So this timing was, I woke up at like 5:15 a.m., which is not normal for me. That's really early for me. And I was on the trainer at 6. So a little bit out of my element, like mentally here, but certainly glad to be here. And you can see we've swallowed up that guy who was off the front. We're kind of all together now, but people are putting in little digs. It's certainly not going to be easy from this point. And I think one guy who got on is back off. I think it's confusing because the guy who was off the front is in that 8-bar kit, and I also think that the guy who we dropped is in the 8-bar kit. So it didn't seem like anything happened, but we actually picked one up from the front and dropped one from the back. I'm trying to ride really conservatively here. The group's gotten split so far down so quickly that you don't really have people who can filter into those gaps. And here I go putting my ice sock in. That's something I did for all of these races, was try to have the ice sock on hand, and then a few minutes in when I start to warm up, put that in my back, and it just helps. I was not able to get the room as cold as I would like it before some of these, so cooling is always paramount. But you can see in the process of trying to get that ice sock in, just looking away for a few seconds, I was off the back, and that's another big surge, which it's kind of death by 1,000 paper cuts with those on RGT in a way that it's maybe not in Zwift. Especially like I was saying, when the field gets split down so far like this is the break of the day for sure. And I think that it's probably going to stay like this as long as we can work together and we don't start playing games. There's a couple little rises and little dips on this one, but it's not particularly there's no big climbs. I am trying, you can see I'm coasting here and using the super tuck, trying to get a little bit better at knowing how to use my momentum on RGT, and finding out where I can sort of back off and where I need to punch it to stay in. No spoilers here, but I definitely did a better job of that on some stages than others, and you'll see where I really paid for it. So this is kind of the little rise, the little punchy little. When I think of Britain, sort of, and this course is like northeast of London, probably by about an hour by car, 2 hours maybe. When I think of that area, this is sort of what I picture, is these little sharp little punches, but not really like an alpine climb or anything, just kind of rolling hills. So I love races like that. I think it offers some interesting ways to break the race up, ways to play the tactics. And I go ahead and stick this guy because he's the one who went from the gun, and I don't know, it seemed like he had a lot to stay away from us. So I just want to make sure he's not going to get away before things start to flatten out again. I definitely have him marked in my mind. But yeah, I love a course that's sort of undulating like that. I think sometimes when there's a big climb, it can kind of neutralize the rest of the race, where everyone will just sort of spin below their threshold and think, I'm saving it for the climb. And sort of the same thing happens in a flat race sometimes, where unless you're the person who wants to do a breakaway or the person whose job it is to bring the breakaway back, almost everyone will think, I just want to save it for the sprint sometimes. So having some elements like that hill that are not necessarily going to be 100% decisive on paper, but give you the opportunity to make a move if you want to, it keeps it interesting. It definitely opens up like a world of tactical possibilities rather than just, go as hard as you can on the climb and see what happens. So, and that's something I think not enough Zwift races are on courses like that. I do love racing on the Richmond Zwift course for that reason. There's a few punchy climbs and then a lot of flat between, and it kind of opens it up for some interesting tactics. And it's like 3 hills that are close together, so do you go on the first one? I don't know. It's just I've seen races play out a lot of different ways there, and that makes it interesting. This is brutal. So falling off like this, I really should have closed this down quicker, because you can see I'm up over 500 watts right now, which is not, I'm doing so much more than they are up there. One thing I notice on RGT though is that sort of formation where you're almost riding side by side kind of. It seems like that is actually a very fast way to ride on RGT, and this is me sort of trying to like reverse engineer how the platform is designed. So someone who works for RGT, I know a few of you have watched some of these videos, so tell me if I'm wrong, but I'll come back to that thought in a second, because here goes C. Jones attacking from the front, which is bold move here, but he seems to have the legs to back it up on this day. And this race ends up being about an hour. I think all of these stages come out to like between 50 minutes and an hour 10, so kind of like honestly kind of long for an e-race, but that's about what I'm used to in real life. Again, I race a lot of cyclocross, a lot of crits, so an hour is right in my wheelhouse. That's kind of what I like to race. I do some longer stuff here and there, but nothing like Dirty Kansas or anything. And God, this effort hurts so bad. But you can see up there, okay, coming back to that thought, they're riding side by side, but they're both doing like 3-4 watts a kilo, and then even me putting down like 5 watts a kilo, I'm not gaining a ton of speed on them. Some of that could be because I'm a lighter rider, so I'm just not cutting through that air as fast. But I also think that sort of natural churn when they're riding side by side like this, I've noticed that I'm saving normally in that position if I'm riding side by side with somebody and sort of like they nose ahead and then I nose ahead and they nose ahead. We're both doing comparable power. It's like you can both do, I don't know, 250 watts, but the speed is more like you're both doing 325 or something, which for me is the difference between sweet spot and over threshold, like the difference between something I could hold for over an hour and something that I could not hold. And here goes Hubbard with a cheeky little move too. Like, this was a very tactical race. A lot of these little, like I said, death by 1,000 paper cuts. But yeah, I think so on RGT, I think when you see that little saving X number of watts in the graph up here, yeah, here he goes. I'm hoping he's going to give me a free ride up there. And kind of does. I got a little bit of a draft there. Yeah, you can see it right there, saving like 30, 40 watts. I'm saving some watts there. Still a little ways off, but when I'm riding up next to somebody and I see that, I think that, especially like how we're riding right now, where we're all kind of next to each other, and I'm not saving anything, but they are. Now I am, and they're not. If you can stay in that sort of line, then none of you are running into the back of each other, so you're not getting that virtual braking. And you're sort of, it's like trading poles, but on like a micro level. And I think the algorithm goes, like the drafting goes maybe a little wider than in real life. So, yeah, tell me if I'm wrong, someone who works for RGT, but that actually, and I'm not saying that's a flaw or anything, that it's different from real life. It's just sort of like, all these games, you have to figure out how the game works and then how to play the game. So I think that actually riding a comparable wattage next to each other and sort of taking your turns naturally as those watts rise and fall, you get a higher average speed than maybe you would trying to rotate like a pace line outside. That's what I'm getting at. And that was a good use of momentum on my end. So that's something that over the course of this stage race, and this is a stage race, there's actually a guy on the RGT forums who collated the times and put them all into like a stage race format, which is super cool. I'm not included in that because they all did the noon time, and I couldn't make the noon time on this one, but plugging my times in, I think I would have been 4th or 5th. I lost a lot of time on this stage because I was not in the biggest group, they ran each of these races 3 times, and so obviously the one with the most people, that group's probably going to go the fastest. Messing with my fan here on the downhill, but again, this is me getting better at gaming the system. Like I knew I needed to move my fan, so I waited until that 3% downhill, and as long as I'm on and as long as no one really hits it there, I could freewheel for a second and not just lose it. But great use of the speed from Hubbard or from Jones there. So that's something that these guys are really hurting me with, that I'm taking notice of. RGT, as in real life, I mean, this is especially in crits in real life, just like recognizing where you have momentum and then applying your power on top of that momentum to sort of get a gap for free. That's just good bike racing. So it makes a lot of sense that works on these online platforms like RGT as well. And I think it works better on RGT than on Zwift. Here goes Jones again. God, such a strong ride from this guy. Just relentless. That attack from the gun was like a full end race sprint. I don't know if he expected to hold that the whole time or if that was maybe just to like thin it out a little bit. It's a smart move either way, because another difference, with RGT is you can actually get boxed in, and that's something I'll get into in my stage 3 video probably. But if you're getting caught, especially one of these sort of mixed ability level groups, here's another one of those paper cuts, another one of those 1,000 that kills me. If you're in one of these mixed ability groups like this race is, and again on RGT, there are no categories. It's not A, B, C or whatever, or like Cat 1, Cat 2 like we have in the US outside. It's more like a Grand Fondo, just everybody start and go together, mass start. And I think that's a function mostly of the fact that there aren't quite as many people on the platform. I think over time they'll probably figure out a way to do that. But yeah, I think that was a smart move for him to go from the gun just to thin it out, because I think naturally, I mean, either you're going to get that gap and just hold it as long as you stay within yourself, or you're going to draw out some of the stronger people, and then you can coalesce off the front, and you guys can roll together, and then you've really limited the possibility that you're going to get stuck behind people or stuck behind a group of people that are losing the wheel, and you can't sort of find a way around. So that's a good strategy. It's good thinking, and I'm glad I had the wherewithal to be one of those people that made it up to him. And I think the reason that works better on RGT than in real life is, attacking from the gun in real life, there are probably some people behind who have a team, or there are probably some teams behind, and a couple of the people on those teams are going to be primarily there to chase someone like you, to chase early breaks. Those are people who their job is not to win. Their job is to set up their teammate whose job it is to win. But on these online platforms, especially RGT, I mean, you're seeing more teams on these platforms, but RGT is just so new that teams haven't really formed, and you don't really see team racing on here. Although I will say, if you want to see some really good team racing in the women's tour, each team fielded, I think, 3 or 4 riders, and the rally team did a great job working together in their version of this stage, the pro version of this stage. So that was really awesome to watch. And while I'm talking about the pro version, I'll just say kudos. Danny Christmas won that stage, and pretty cool. It was covered on The Telegraph, which is like a big UK newspaper, cyclingnews.com. everybody's hurting for content right now for racing, so pretty cool. And they did a good job racing together. But in a race like this community race, no one has a teammate, so there are none of those people who are going to burn their matches to chase us back just to help their teammates or whatever. And this is another spot where I know I have to stay on before these little downhills. So the day before this was so I'm going to count it out. I guess I did 2 crits on Sunday, day off on Monday, and then the day before this was the Wednesday RGT, like a community organized race on RGT. And on one of these little flats like this, or little downhills just like this, I got dropped, just absolutely dropped like a sack of potatoes, because I let the gap go out a little bit, and then it was at probably this kind of distance, just a few yards, and I didn't stay on the power. The group ahead of me got so much time on me. So right now I know I have to carry that momentum into this uphill and get back on, because it's going to turn back down a little bit. And it's amazing how quickly a group can get away from you, even if they're not really pedaling that hard. And that's true in real life too, though. I mean, a big group goes downhill faster, unless it's technical downhill, and that was not a technical downhill. So yeah, as these guys kick it up right here, I'm just going to make sure to stay on. That's a good move on their part, though, after seeing me kind of come off on that last one. It's worth a little tester there, but I'm not going to let that happen again for sure. This section with the little downhill straight into the uphill was kind of a good way for me to learn how to carry momentum on those type of sections before the third stage, the crit stage, the Canary Wharf course. It was the only one in this race that wasn't one of these magic roads, that was a pre-existing real road course is what they call it. So there's the magic roads, which are generated from a GPX file, and then there's the quote-unquote real roads, which are the fully built-out environments in RGT. And Canary Wharf is a crit course, I believe, in London, and that's where they did the last stage of this race. But it's kind of a hot dog shaped crit, and like almost a 180 on either end with a straight in between. And in the middle of that straightaway, there's a little downhill uphill, like just straight down, straight back up. No, not really much flat in between, and it makes it really interesting. But learning how to sort of slingshot on these sections of this little rolling hill stage, and I would imagine that's a big portion of British racing in general, just because of how the topography is. There's a lot of small hills that are close together. Having ridden and I guess you could say race, I rode a Gran Fondo in Italy. Like Italian riding is different, because it's like, at least the area I was in the north, it's almost never flat unless you're along like a coast or a lake or something. So you're kind of always going up or always going down, but those downs and ups are a lot longer, so the momentum doesn't really play as much of a factor. It's more just pacing yourself and like being a good descender. I mean, focusing on getting down the descent quickly, but also on saving some energy while you do that, and sort of recovering on those so that you can punch a little harder on the uphills. And a lot of those climbs will be like 10 minutes to 30 minutes, so you can go maybe a little over FTP, but not so much. This sort of terrain is a little bit different, where these hills are really short, but like we're on a 4% right now, under a minute sometimes, but they come thick and fast. So maybe calling this a flat road race was a little bit of a misnomer, but it's relatively flat, and it's not a crit like the last day. So I'm kind of just trying to differentiate these stages from one another. Again, little attacks going. Some of this is just momentum, but like you can see Hubbard, I think that was probably a little bit of an attack there. He went up to 6 watts a kilo, and these guys are not going to make it easy on me. It's whenever whenever there's an opportunity, they're just throwing these little punches, and it was super hard. The stage was so hard. I also know that the gap back to anyone else, it's not like, sometimes in a road race, if you're riding in a break and people are attacking the brake a lot, and the momentum is not great and you're getting burnt out, you can kind of just drop back to the field or drop back to the next group on the road and kind of know that this group I'm in they're not working together smoothly, and we're not getting a lot of time, so it probably is fine if I drop back. I can drop back and get some rest in a larger group, and this group that I'm in now will probably get swallowed up. I feel like that's not the case here. Looking at the gaps behind me on the little list on the left over there. And once again, I was messing with something like my music or something, and I've gotten gapped off. I am trying to take note of these corners and slow down enough that it's not going to make me brake for the corner and then punch out. And yeah, so now I'm sure that I'm clear of the corner. I'm going to put down a big effort to get some speed. It looks like there's another little corner up here, but that's probably not enough that it's going to make me brake. This is just so brutal, though. Just one guy, and then a few bike lengths, and then another guy, and then a few bike lengths. So hard. So this is the kind of situation in a real road race. If the brake was operating like this, I probably would just drop back to the field and know that these two guys were coming back. But because of the lack of any teams on RGT and the lack of really just the fact that I think those of us that made this break, it's because we're the strongest guys. There's probably not the firepower in the field to chase it back. So, and especially for me, I don't know if I've talked about this, but I'm not a great time trialist. I'm a smaller guy. My raw watts are not super impressive, but my watts per kilo are pretty good. Also, my steady power is not that great. I am more of a punchy rider. Like a lot of, as much as I'm saying this is hurting me, all these little digs over threshold, I do have a lot of these matches. That's kind of my strength, being someone who races cross, races crits. You get to where maybe even if the numbers are not that impressive themselves, the repeatability is what's impressive. Like I can do a lot of those small punches very close together without paying as much of a price for it, or I just have more of them in the match box, which is good for me right now because I've just barely made it on once again. So hard. But what would be even harder for me is if I got off the back of these two guys and I was just in no man's land by myself, especially after all these efforts. I am not a good time trialist. I'm not good at holding steady power for a long, long time. We still have 12 miles to go. We're about dead center halfway into the race here. So I think what would end up happening there, I mean, if I got stuck in no man's land, I would still definitely give it my all, try and settle into whatever felt like the most I think I could hold. It would probably be something like 290 watts or something over 4 watts a kilo. But like I said, my over 4 watts a kilo for me is not that many raw watts. So as a time trialist, it doesn't look that impressive, and it doesn't push me through the air that fast if I'm on my own. And this is something where I don't know how this translates to RGT. I know that Zwift has some sort of CDA, like aerodynamic value algorithm thing, so it actually does factor in whether you're a larger or smaller rider, and then also the wind resistance of your bike and wheels. I don't know if that's true on RGT, but even on Zwift, it's not, super realistic because everyone has different positions on the bike and all that stuff. But how are you going to account for that? But yeah, generally speaking, I guess outside I'm pretty good at getting low and getting aerodynamic, but even still, my steady state power is just no good. That's one of the things I've actually spent a lot of time in this shutdown working on, is that steady state power, and that's part of why I've been doing a lot of e-racing, especially on Zwift. Like a 20-minute crit on Zwift is much different than a crit outside. It ends up being more just like a 20-minute FTP test type effort, because you can be on the pedals the whole time. The corners don't slow you down. Now, RGT is a lot more realistic to a real crit effort with all those spiky accelerations, and even in this more of a road race type course, we've had a lot of those accelerations. Another thing I've noticed is RGT is a little quicker to give you that standing up hammering animation. So I've had to learn that just because you're seeing that animation doesn't mean that someone's necessarily attacking. I think on Zwift you have to be doing like double your FTP to get that or something. So it's a little bit more of an indication that someone is trying to break away or just accelerate in general. So on RGT, I'm trying to not let that throw me off and really just look at the other people's speed and momentum. Man, Hubbard is riding so strong, and it's, yeah, that's what I was hoping would happen is that Jones would fill into that gap, and then we can just smoothly and slowly apply power to bring it back. But see, Jones, that wasn't a full attack from Jones for sure. Just gave him that animation. It's causing us to do this churn though, which I think will probably net us a faster speed. So that was an attack. So yeah, if I did not make one of these little attacks and just get stuck out in no man's land and have to settle in from this far out, probably what would happen is I would settle into something that was the absolute max I thought I could hold, and one of these groups behind would probably overhaul me fairly close to the line, and I would be completely blown up, and there would be some people in that group who had done less work than me because they've been in a group, and I would get overhauled by that group too. I mean, maybe not just, they wouldn't just come over the top of me and drop me immediately, but I guess worst case scenario, and maybe I'm just imagining the worst case scenario here, is that they would catch me right before the finish, and then before I can get any recovery, they start speeding up, start that sort of frenzied final push toward the finish and drop me. So I do know it's kind of do or die in terms of sticking with these two and trying to make sure I stay up here and stay in it. That's why I'm willing to make all of these little surges. I've also noticed on my RGT races, it seems like my watts per kilo are almost always higher than the people I'm finishing around. So maybe I'm wasting some watts running into the back of people, or maybe I need to be applying my power more smoothly. But it does seem like other people are getting farther for the same watts than I am. And that could also be a function of the fact that I'm so small, and there's a lot more like what I'm doing right now, cutting through the air by yourself on RGT, especially in these type of races. Whew. Wow, Jones not just getting there, but going full attack over the top. So the alarm bells weren't really on for me there because I knew he was behind me, and I was hoping he would kind of take the reins and pull the rest of this gap back, but he has seen that opportunity fit to attack, so now I got to get up there. This is the hardest part, is when you're close but you're not really saving anything, and it's so tempting to back off, but if you do, you're definitely going backwards unless they back off first, and they didn't. So once again, I just had to get there. It is a little tough with these corners and stuff on this circuit. I don't have a great idea of like where I'm going and when the corners are coming up. But so I'll talk about the magic roads a little bit more. So this is a route created from a GPX file that is actually using some of the roads that that this race would be run on in real life, which is part of why it's so appealing or interesting to me. Is like it's a way to virtually see other people's roads. I mean, ride some stuff that you wouldn't normally get to ride. And one thing that's been happening on RGT that I've gotten into sort of is people taking their local recurring races or rides onto RGT using the magic roads to recreate their local circuit or whatever. That's super interesting to me, being able to like get involved in a local scene from across the world or whatever. And but with the scenery and stuff, it does make it a little bit hard. I kind of wish there was like an overhead map view somewhere that you could toggle on and off. I might leave that on for a race that had any significant corners or anything. But I do like the view up in the right above my head where you can see the profile coming up. That is really helpful. But so this is a magic road, and that's why it sort of peters out. There's like the road, and then there's dirt, and then a little grass, and then it just sort of peters out, and these trees and bushes and stuff are just kind of randomly placed. Here goes another attack. So this is what all of the magic roads look like right now. I am hearing in the Facebook groups and the forums and stuff, this is sort of Magic Roads 1.0, and apparently there's something that will be called Magic Roads 2.0, and they haven't let on much to what that means. I'm thinking what it means probably is more robust scenery and something that generates, I think it's mostly going to have to do with the look. I will say one feature that they had early on that's already, as of today, this is brand new, been changed, is up to this point you had to, if you were going to create a magic road to be able to ride it, you had to get 5 other people to commit to it. So you basically had to make a group ride and get 5 people to sign up. And I think that was a way for them to make sure that like one guy just wouldn't sit at home and upload like 50 magic roads and then ride them one time. I'm sure that would be a huge burden on their server or their system or wherever this stuff lives and whatever generates it. I mean, if you think about what we're doing here, this is pretty crazy. It makes sense that something like this would happen for an event like the Women's Tour, where it is a big race that they're trying to simulate, and they ran a full pro race on these roads. But some of the races I've been doing on here are literally just like a club's Tuesday night crit, and they just got the file from their park, loaded it up, and they're running it on here. And if you think about how sort of amazing it is that it can create routes like that, so they've done away with that 5-person limit. So as of today, you can create your own magic road and ride it by yourself if you want to, which opens up a huge number of possibilities. Again, with these little gaps. This is, one of the 1,000 paper cut number 700 right here. That's killing me. But yeah, there's huge applications for that in my mind, especially like, let's say you're a triathlete. If you can get a GPX file of your course, you could load it up on here, and you could ride the whole course. Like, you could do your training on the course you're going to race on virtually. You could try out different pacing strategies, get used to, not the landmarks exactly, but you could mark it out in terms of like, okay, when I get to mile 10, we're going to hit this climb. This is about how steep it is. This is about how much power I want to put out. There's a big turn at mile 15, and like, here's about how steep or how shallow it is. And again, I just reached down for my towel, and there is no rest for the weary in this group. If I do anything, these guys are putting in little digs to drop me. And here goes a big one. Or not so much a big one, just a painful one, because I keep almost getting on. It makes me wonder if these two are using the look back camera, and they'll do the thing where when I get close, they just start to hit it again. But yeah, that Magic Roads feature is a real game changer, I think, especially the being able to do it on your own. And some people complain about how this looks or whatever, but honestly, especially when I'm racing, I care a lot about the profile of the road and the turns, but it's not so concerning to me. I don't know. I don't think I've ever been racing one of these Magic Roads and like been really focused on what the scenery on the sides looks like. I mean, I guess I do enjoy like the Richmond course in Zwift is really well rendered, and it's fun to go under the little monorail train and come through the cobblestones and all that. I do like all that, but as far as like when you really think about what this is doing in terms of just taking a route from the real world and plopping it down on a virtual platform, it's already very impressive to me. I don't know. Some people, I guess a lot of people are also riding these online platforms for different reasons than I am. For me, right now, during lockdown especially, a lot of it is just about having an outlet for sort of competition and the social aspect of it. I do enjoy the game sort of part of Zwift where you are gaining XP and all that kind of stuff, but I think the real big motivator, I mean the thing that got me onto these online platforms and has kept me on, is the racing and being able to race with other people. And it's sort of offered me this like interesting window into a lot of different racing that I wouldn't be able to do. I got another video on here jumping into the Austin Driveway Series crit, and there's some World Tour riders in that. And you know, Driveway Series is one of those things I've always like thought was cool and wanted to do, and it's not exactly the same to do it on Zwift or whatever, but it's an interesting window in. Like you get in there and there are some guys who do that race in real life that are, you know, in the chat talking smack to each other. It's an interesting way to connect with people and do something different and keep the competition going. That's the big thing for me, is like I can't just get out there and hammer myself for nothing. Like I need some reason to be working hard, something to shoot for, something to train for. I'll say, I mean, I can sit and do intervals as long as there's a reason I'm doing it. And I guess with the shutdown right now, it's sort of demotivating when, you know, I could start training for cyclocross right now, but who knows if that's going to happen. And I think anyone who says they know for sure is kind of deluding themselves either way. Anyone who says it's going to happen or it's not going to happen. So without some sort of carrot to chase, I just get a little bit unmotivated. But I will say that all of this online racing, be it Zwift or RGT, has kept me motivated to ride hard, kept me pushing the pedals hard, and learning like the ins and outs of these different platforms is kind of, it's like learning a new skill. It's like learning to corner better outside or something. Like it's I think that's what I like about cycling in general, is kind of the process element of it. There's always something to identify that as something you can improve on, and then figure out how to improve it, and then go through that process that you've come up with and sort of like, you know, first of all, try out a process and say, did I get better or not? And then change that. But there's always something to be focusing on getting better at, whether that's physiologically or technique wise or gear setup, or I think that just goes to like the kind of analytical person I am. I mean, little things like using the ice sock or all kinds of things about my setup here. I'll talk a little bit. Ooh, this might be the one. This might be the final paper cut. Nope, I'm making it back. I'll talk a little bit about what my setup is for these races here. When the shutdown happened, I did not have a quote-unquote smart trainer. I guess they call it a smart trainer, but I had a Kinetic Rock and Roll, the one that does not have a resistance unit. It does have in-ride power sensor, which according to GP Llama, is about as accurate as most of the pedals out there, as long as you calibrate it. And I was calibrating it every ride, but I started doing some of the Zwift racing in the first couple of weeks of lockdown and decided I wanted to be able to dual record power, just to make sure that I was on point, producing something that was accurate. So I went ahead and invested in the Asioma Duo power meter, which I'd never had a power meter on my bike outside before. So that's been another fun thing, is being able to ride outside with power. And the Asioma Duo's pedal-based power meter, it's a right-left power meter that uses Amp Plus or Bluetooth, so connects to all these apps, and that's been really helpful. And it's also just good to know, it's easy to calibrate. I always calibrate it every time before one of these races, before anything indoors really, and it's just good to know that my power is accurate. So at that point I had accurate power, but I didn't have anything that was simulating the grade. So it was like I was just fighting this fluid resistance trainer and using my gears to change the resistance. So Kinetic put the resistance unit on sale actually a lot of Kinetic stuff has been on sale, so if you want or need a trainer, I recommend the Kinetic stuff. It's been really good. Ooh, that is a stinging attack on this little downhill. But yeah, Kinetic put the resistance units on sale, so now what I'm running is a Kinetic Rock and Roll Smart Control, so it can rock side to side, and it also has the resistance control unit that is controlling for the gradients. And when I'm racing, I normally put it on 50%. That just seems to be the standard for most people. I don't know, you guys tell me, is that standard? Is that what people... I've heard that most of the big Zwift racers actually put their trainer feedback around 25%, or trainer difficulty is what it's called on Zwift. I think people get tripped up on that it's called trainer difficulty, because it's really not more or less difficult. It's more or less resistance, but then you're using your gears to counteract that resistance. So it's really just kind of a difference in how the weight of the flywheel feels. You basically just, when the resistance clamps down more, you have less momentum on that flywheel. And when the resistance lets up, your flywheel has a little more momentum. And if you're using your gears correctly, it's not that different. It's just something to, I don't know, makes it feel a little better, I guess, or more realistic in a way. But yeah, I think people get tripped up on that word difficulty. They think if they put it to 0, it's going to be easier. But I mean, I can tell you, if you're doing 300 watts, 300 watts is 300 watts. It may feel a little bit different because of that flywheel inertia, but in terms of like your physiological, like let's say your FTP is, I don't know, 250 with trainer resistance at 100. If you put your trainer resistance to 0, your FTP is not going up. You're still only going to be able to do that 250 for an hour. It's going to feel different how you get that 250, but it's still 250, if that makes sense. It feels a little different, but the outcome is the same. So I think people get a little too tripped up on that. But having said that, I wanted something that would mimic these gradients and do that. So yeah, that's what I'm running now, is the Rock and Roll Smart Control, which I like the Rock and Roll function a lot, where so it's kind of makes the whole trainer, it's sort of designed like a skateboard truck. If you're familiar with how a skateboard works, there's like a bushing, a little rubber bushing with a bolt through the middle called a kingpin, and then the whole thing can either squish down on one side or the other of that rubber bushing, which kind of returns it to the neutral position. That's sort of how the design of this trainer works. And what that allows you to do is shift side to side a little bit. It keeps you from having that sort of like locked in, like how that avatar is rocking the bike back and forth. You can rock the bike back and forth a little bit, which I'll say it doesn't feel exactly the same as it does outside, but especially on a longer trainer ride, which I never would have done before this shutdown, but now I'm doing pretty regularly. I used to, I would ride the trainer especially to get ready for cyclocross season, to do some short intervals, but I was never really riding the trainer for anything that was longer than an hour. Like, I would just get on, do an interval session that was an hour long and get off. But now that so much riding has been brought inside, I'm doing races that are longer than that. I'm doing some of my aerobic rides are a lot longer than that, in the like 2, 3, 4 hour range, and having that ability to move the bike side to side a little bit really reduces fatigue, even if it's just mental. Just not feeling like you're totally locked in. It feels good. I like it. I don't know. I would recommend it. I know Ceres makes a thing that's sort of the same idea, but it's a thing you put your entire your trainer and your whole bike setup on top of, and then it's like a platform that moves around. That seems like a decent idea. It's just super expensive, and I think you would already have to have a pretty expensive trainer to need that. So yeah, I think the Rock and Roll, in terms of like bang for your buck, is a pretty good value proposition. Same thing with the Duo pedals also, actually. So what I'm doing here is my power source and my cadence source is the power meter on my pedals, and the trainer, smart control trainer, is only connected for my resistance. And then I have a Garmin heart rate monitor that's connected through Amp Plus. And I've really, since I've switched to that setup, I've got my pedals going through Amp Plus and then Bluetooth on the smart control trainer. I really haven't had any problems with dropouts or anything. I do have an Amp Plus dongle that's like right under my bottom bracket, so I think that helps. And you do have to be careful not to step on it. The other part of my setup is I'm running a laptop, which is a refurbished Dell. I don't know, I found some site that basically buys old business laptops in bulk, and then you can get them to add memory and add RAM and all that stuff. So I've got 16 gigs of RAM and terabyte of memory on this thing. It's not a super impressive machine, but it's got an Intel i5 processor and Iris graphics card, which I read that both of those work well with Zwift, so that's kind of how I ended up there. I wish I had a little bit more power. I've had some problems. Blistering attack there once again. I've had some problems with when I'm doing these races and recording these races at the same time, getting some like laggy frame rate issues, especially recently. Like my last couple have gotten weird. I think I might just need to update my recording software, but nonetheless, I wish I had a little bit more power. But I normally run that, and then I have a Samsung, really cheap Samsung tablet that I run the RGT, I guess they don't call it a companion app, but the RGT mobile app, and then sort of same thing for Zwift. I run Zwift on the laptop and use the companion app on the tablet, and that frees up my phone I do have my phone sitting where I can see it, but that keeps it from, like, if calls or texts or stuff like that are coming in, it's not getting in the way of my companion app or my mobile app. So that's helpful. And I guess the other thing to note is that to do these recordings, I run a second screen that I have connected with an HDMI cable. It's just a kind of crappy, honestly, TV that I have on my table off to the side, and then I just leave the recording software open on that, and that allows me to glance over there from time to time and just make sure that the frame rate is looking good. The green screen behind me is still smooth. I guess I should do a video on that whole setup at some point. It's pretty bootleg and pretty cobbled together, but it's working well. I like the results at this point. It took me a long time to get there. If you go back and watch some of my older videos, frame rates would be bad, or the green screen wouldn't be smooth, or the lighting was weird, but I'm always making improvements over time, just the same way I am in cycling. I think it's another outlet for me to like be analytical and make improvements. Ooh, got some more little digs going here. It is interesting to me that these guys are just putting in these tiny moves and not really I guess these aren't moves though. If you watch the watts per kilo, we're all keeping it. That might have been a move. See, they'll hit 6 or 7 watts a kilo just for a second and then settle back in at 3. So I'm not totally sure what the idea is there, but it does seem strange. I don't know. But it is definitely, it's making me hurt. It's keeping me from getting a free ride. So maybe that is the idea, is you back off, let the speed go down a little bit. It's kind of like the technique of riding someone off the back is what they call it in a breakaway, where you know, you're like next to last or something in the breakaway and you just let the gap go out in front of you slowly, so that then the person behind you has to come around you, sprint around you, and get back up to the wheel. And when they do that, you kind of accelerate with them into their draft, so you've done less than they have. And that's a technique you can use to, you know, do that over and over and over and just kind of wear someone down, someone that you don't want to be in the break. I mean, that's always, you're kind of playing with fire when you do that, because you're kind of asking someone to, now they want to get rid of you, now they want to attack you. But that's a sneaky little tactic you'll see sometimes, especially when there's like, maybe there's one really good sprinter in a break of 5 people. People start trying to take him off the back. Or I guess it's really when there's like one marked rider against everyone else, you'll see people start doing that. Or maybe if a team has 2 people, someone else will start trying to take that extra teammate off the back and make him do those little chases. So I think this might be, it's actually been a few days since this race, so I don't fully remember how this finish played out. I think that might have been it though. So I was looking to go full sprint kind of after this turn, I think was sort of my plan when we hit 0.2 miles to go. Yeah, right there. And I think I just left it too late. They hit it on that uphill drag. I kind of hoped we would stay together and then I'd be able to go full sprint right there. But left it a little too late. Should have attacked on that little hill. That was totally my bad. I should have known that's actually kind of my strength anyway, is to attack on that little uphill drag. Oof, died 1,000 deaths here. But yeah, so that's stage 1 in the books. Got a podium. Good, strong race with these guys. I'll have the rest of the race videos out. Be on the lookout for them. Let me know what you think. Later.